Today on CityCast Nashville, we're digging into why what seemed like a simple piece of administrative legislation, moving the Metro Historic Zoning Commission under the umbrella of the Planning Department, sparked so much controversy. Does it tie into our larger citywide battles of downtown versus neighborhoods and neighborhoods versus development? WPLN's Cynthia Abrams is here to explain. It's Monday, March 24th. I am your executive producer, Whitney Pasterek, and this is what Nashville's talking about. So, Cynthia, what is this legislation that just passed Metro Council that moves the Metro Historic Zoning Commission staff under the Planning Department?
That's basically it. The bill that just passed on Tuesday night, the Metro Council approved, moves the Historic Zoning Commission under the city's planning department. It was actually an amended version of the original bill that was put forth by the bill's sponsor, District 7 Councilmember Emily Benedict. That original version would have moved both the Historical Commission and the Historic Zoning Commission under the planning department. But the version that passed saw just the Historic Zoning Commission staff moved under planning.
All right, really quickly, what's the difference between the Metro Historic Commission and the Metro Historic Zoning Commission?
A good question. The Historical Commission focuses on education and direct preservation efforts, while the Historic Zoning Commission regulates exterior work within historic zoning districts, working towards preservation through design guidelines and permit reviews.
Okay, so that's the difference between this is an old building that we should save because it has historical value, and I would like to build a garage behind my house in a historic overlay district. Can I do that?
Exactly.
But this was all fueled mostly by concerns about downtown. Can you explain why the sponsor said it was necessary and why the downtown businesses felt that it was such a huge priority for them?
There were kind of a few motivations or stated reasons behind this bill at play. So there are certain neighborhoods, including downtown, where there are special rules or overlays in place that regulate how things look, how things are built, what size they can be. And it's been the case that for a long time, there's been tension about those regulations. Some people like the rules and feel they can preserve the character of a neighborhood or a street, while others, including a number of downtown business owners, that have been really frustrated at the restrictions on building that those regulations can impose. So Benedict, the bill's sponsor, says that it would streamline processes, and there's some thought that it would help appease the tension and frustrations of those business owners.
So wait, what are those business owners frustrated about? Is it like I need to get a permit to hang my big-ass honky-tonk sign over the roadway? Or is it I want to build a plate glass neon tower and they're not letting me do that?
It can kind of be both. Sometimes it can come down to exterior lighting or the look of a building. Yeah, it can be kind of a little bit all over the place, I think.
Okay. My assumption is that historic feels like downtown needs to maintain that brick facade character that you see on Broadway, you used to see on 2nd Avenue.
Exactly. Think about the kind of character you see as you're walking down Broadway. It looks cohesive in a sense. And I think that's a lot of what the Historic Zoning Commission is seeking to kind of preserve. And so as business owners, want to kind of change that or update their businesses, zoning can restrict some of those changes.
What does this bill do to assuage their frustration?
The hospitality industry, the downtown business owners, have been lobbying state legislators and city government to kind of peel back some of these restrictions. Something that was happening at the same time as this council bill was moving was that there was a bill in the state legislature, a preemption bill that would have gutted local oversight of historic buildings. That bill, it was amended at the very end, but in its original form, it basically would prevent historic zoning commissions from regulating buildings that were built after 1899 in so-called tourist development zones. Essentially, all of downtown Nashville is in such a zone. So it would be major state preemption, which of course is something that the city has struggled with quite a bit over the last few years. We've seen a lot of preemption bills.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Community Oversight Board being dismantled, because that is another instance where the call seems to have been coming from inside the House, right? There was that whistleblower who said it was, in fact, the top brass at MNPD who worked with the state to craft that legislation. So this feels like another example of that. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. And ultimately, this was kind of the city, again, trying to avoid this state bill from being passed. So I think it was the understanding of Nashville leaders, including the mayor, that if Metro passed this bill, the state would, they hoped, drop their bill. At least Mayor O'Connell said that that was kind of his big motivation for supporting it. And ultimately, we did see the state remove this bill from their consideration less than a day after the Metro Council approved theirs.
That's fascinating. Does historic zoning being under planning do anything to solve the problem for the downtown business owners?
I think there's some debate about how much impact this actually will have. You know, we saw at a Metro Council meeting earlier this month, we saw a member of the mayoral administration, Dave Rosenberg, kind of say, this won't make any changes. This won't have any effect. And some council members in response were like, well, why are we pushing this? Why are we passing this then? It will be interesting to see how this plays out and what impacts or changes this will have, if any.
And meanwhile, we saw at last Tuesday's council meeting, like hours of not downtown business owners, in fact, just regular citizens, presidents of neighborhood associations, residents of districts that have historic overlays getting up at the public hearing to testify about how they were worried that this bill will somehow destroy, here's that word again, the character of their neighborhoods. What were their concerns, and why do you think they were so frightened?
As you said, the people who were opposing this bill were largely residents of neighborhoods that have these historic overlays. And it was a lot of residents who are really pushing for the preservation of their neighborhoods as it is today. They don't want to see new development, tall and skinnies, construction kind of pop up on their street or in their neighborhoods.
Can we be specific about what neighborhoods we're talking about here?
So there were people from Richland, West End, Laughlin Springs, someone from Cane Ridge community.
And if I had to characterize, especially, I don't know Cane Ridge that well, but if I had to characterize Laughlin Springs, I would say that these are very nice, very expensive single-family homes built in neighborhoods that don't have a whole lot of density. And even when there is an infill house that goes up, they still have to maintain the facade of the other historical houses around it. So it might be a 2,500 square foot house, but it looks like a cottage in the front.
Exactly.
Their concern was somehow that this then will render those overlays moot, or?
There were a few different reasons why opponents to this bill were mad. Concern about less regulation was definitely one of them. I think these are residents that want to preserve the look of their neighborhoods. There were also some opponents who were frustrated at what they felt was the city kind of catering to the state. They felt like, the city was kind of yielding and heeding the work of the downtown lobbyists and kind of what they desired. And I think that there were also a lot of people who were frustrated about the rushed nature of this bill. It was fairly rushed in an attempt to try and beat the state legislation. Of course, as we said, after this bill was passed, the state legislation was then dropped. And so because of that, the process ended up happening so that the public hearing happened on the same time this bill was on its third and final consideration. Typically, public hearings happen on a bill's second consideration so that the bill is still amendable. That allows council members to kind of hear what the public has to say about it and try and make amendments to the bill, heeding those requests and statements. And in this case, that wasn't possible because it was happening on the bill's third and final reading. So there were people who were just frustrated kind of about not having the time and space to make their thoughts heard.
There was definitely something very awkward about having a line of people out the door saying, we don't want this. And then the council being like, oh, and it's passed. It was a very unique situation. And I appreciate you like listing out the players. And I do think it's incredibly important to know that those downtown business owners were working hand in hand with the state to do whatever was going to happen. So this does seem like a wait and see. I want to talk now about something that I think is connected but different, which is that the residents of Belmead have formed Friends of Belmead Boulevard in order to sue the city over a sidewalk. What is that about?
Yes, exactly. So a group of Belmead residents have filed a lawsuit. The city of Belmead was planning to build 2 5-foot sidewalks along the median of Belmead Boulevard. Right now, if you're a pedestrian trying to travel along Belmead Boulevard, you have to walk alongside the median unprotected from traffic. So it's really dangerous. And a new plan would have built these buffered paths on either side of it. But the residents who filed this lawsuit are saying that the road is meant for, quote, vehicular traffic, not so much pedestrians. They are unhappy that the plan would cut down some of the trees that are along the median. And they also say that it would be unsafe for pedestrians to have to cross the street to get to those protected sidewalks. You know, I think that there's widespread tension about who roads are for. We know Nashville is a very car-centric place. And so some people, like these Belmead residents, think roads kind of get right of way. Cars on roads get right of way. But I think there's the other notion that we're all paying for infrastructure, whether you drive or you bike or you walk, and we should all have equitable access to our roads. And there's been a big movement towards making roads more accessible. This was extremely central to the transit referendum, which, of course, was passed by a wide majority of Nashville voters.
Likely including some Belmead residents.
Yes.
Even though they're their own city down there. Do they not need to walk places?
I would imagine they need to cross the street or walk along. But I think that if you live along Belmead Boulevard and, you know, I don't know if it's that they don't want to see the construction outside their homes if they're living there, or their typical day is to get into their car and drive along the street. There's no walking involved in that. Of course, that's not true for residents who don't own cars or need to walk to get to a bus station.
We're back with Cynthia Abrams from WPLN. Cynthia, all of this to me feels like it's just small pieces in what is a larger conversation happening in Nashville right now about how do we make this city work for everybody, and not in the sense of everybody has jobs. It's everybody has a place to live. People literally don't have enough space to live in this town. You know, the planning department just went on what the Nashville Scene called a, quote, 2-month tour, talking to various communities about the need to close the gap in our housing availability. And they estimate we need about 90,000 units over the next decade. And a good place to start, in my opinion, seemed to be those Nest bills that were brought before Metro Council, where they were designed to make it easier for developers to build what's known as missing middle housing. That ended in a lot of screaming at community meetings, much like this Metro zoning thing did, and much like I'm anticipating the Belmead Boulevard sidewalk will, if it hasn't already. And a lot of that screaming is happening in the nicer areas of town. Can you give me your analysis as to why?
I think that this is just one of the major tensions around development in Nashville. You know, we have a lot of people moving here, a lot of growth, and people are very divided about where that growth should go. Metro has plans and zoning rules that they try to encourage certain types of growth in certain areas. But, you know, I think something that is difficult is that people often experience a kind of inconsistency in their opinion. You know, I think some people can have a certain idea in mind about where and how growth should happen and needs to happen. But that conviction can also be tested if they know there's going to be construction or disruption near them on their block or in their backyard. So we all know that growth is happening and we have a shortage in our housing supply. But people can have strong opinions if it's close to them. They're concerned about traffic and noise. And it kind of comes back to what environment people want to live in, what kind of city they want to live in. So we have these groups like the Historic Zoning Commission that are trying to maintain the way things feel for the charm and the character and the historical element. But that can also feel like restrictions to development or growth. I think it's a major tension that we're grappling with, and we're seeing it manifest in all of these different debates.
Yeah, there was another great article in The Scene written by Eli Modica talking about how because there are these restrictions on what can and can't be built in so many parts of town, that means the density is getting pushed onto the pikes. So you have these neighborhoods where it's apartment buildings on the busiest streets in town, and then these bucolic, lovely places for people who can afford a single family home. That feels unsustainable to me.
I think that that's kind of the double-edged sword of these overlays is like, while it can be used to protect how a place looks or feels, and, you know, in some ways that creates these exclusive high-value types of areas that are inaccessible for people who aren't super high income. But then the flip side of that is that it pushes development into areas that don't have these overlays. And then you're opening the door to extreme redevelopment and gentrification. You know, we look at places like in areas of North Nashville where entire neighborhoods can just get ripped down and expensive houses can get put up. So that situation can also create neighborhoods that are also inaccessible.
And I want to read a quote from one woman who was at one of those planning meetings. She said, while there may be a need for affordable housing, the Bordeaux community, the Black community, has had to bear the burden for decades of solving the city's problems. We don't have sit-down restaurants. We don't have businesses to invest in. Developers are getting very aggressive, mentioning these 20,000 and 30,000 units, saying they're being told to come to us. We know they're not going to places like Green Hills.
Yeah.
Do residents in neighborhoods like Green Hills simply have more resources and more time to fight back against things like dense development?
I mean, I think that that's absolutely a role in it. I think it can be difficult to dedicate your evening to showing up at a Metro Council public hearing to speak about something you're against. It can be difficult to find time if you're working a full-time job to read up on a bill that may or may not affect you and tend to formulate your opinion on it. But I also think, you know, of course, there's decades of historical zoning that has left certain neighborhoods preserved, while others have, you know, we've seen ripped down and people pushed out and neighborhoods completely overhauled and gentrified.
In your time covering Metro for WPLN, have you ever attended a hearing or a public meeting where you watched somebody change their mind on an issue of NIMBYism?
That's a good question. I'm sure I've seen, you know, council members have their views swayed by people showing up in force to ask for something. I think that we can sometimes see people kind of be open to change. Yeah, I don't know. I think that that's a good question that I should kind of be on the lookout for.
Oh, yeah, please. And come back and tell us.
I'm sad to say that I haven't necessarily, you know, there's not a moment in my memory that really stands out. I think it can be difficult to change your mind when it's something that can, you know, feel very personal, which can lead to an element of stubbornness.
Yeah, I mean, people are absolutely dug in on this. And I think the question for our leadership, for council, the mayor's office, probably at the state level too, is finding ways to ensure that we can accommodate everybody who wants to live in our hip and happening city of Nashville, but not make people feel as though their way of life or their neighborhood character are being inextricably changed.
It's a difficult balance to strike. And I think that we're seeing our leaders constantly kind of try and toe that line and sometimes not succeed.
Okay, can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Where do you live?
I live in Inglewood. I rent a house with 2 roommates in a very old, tiny house in East Nashville.
And do you have any hope in the near future of being able to purchase your own real estate here in Nashville?
Not in the near future. I think that it remains out of reach for me on a public media salary. Yeah, I think I feel very lucky to be content with my living situation and be able to, afford rent because I'm living with close friends. But yeah, no, that's out of reach.
Yeah. And the alternative really then does become, it's time to go to Mount Juliet, it's time to go to Lebanon, it's time to go to Ashland City. And I often wonder if we're just domino affecting people right out of their homes in those communities too.
Totally. I mean, it's a constant battle too. And if you think about, if you're not willing to make the sacrifice of your time to commute in from neighborhoods, if you don't have a car, if you want to walk or bike or bus to work, that eliminates those options.
Well, all of these issues aren't going away anytime soon, and I know you're staying on them. So from whatever the consequences are of moving the Historical Zoning Commission under planning to will Nashville find a way to build the 90-some-odd thousand units that we need in the next 10 years, we'll trust you to stay on it and come back and talk to us when there's news.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. If you enjoyed the show, here's a cool thing you could do. Tell your friends. Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Y'all take care of each other.